Well, you made it. We're gonna keep it rolling down the river, as somebody would say. I don't know. Tina Turner on a metal show. Did you ever think you'd see it? I did. What's not anything like Tina Turner is our next guest, except for those legs. Woo! You know him from Apnea. Let's go ahead and welcome at this time Mr. Steve Allington. Hey, man.
I got my Halloween costume going on.
Yeah.
Makes me look 20 times bigger than I am. So. And I got my
festive.
wizard. I'm looking for a wizard thing so I can just wear the wizard hat.
Yeah. What would your wizard name be?
Yeah,
me neither.
Probably Snorelord.
Yeah,
That'd
there
be
you
my
go.
wizard.
There you go. Where does that originate from, by the way? I mean, not to get too far ahead, but that's your YouTube channel handle.
Yeah, that's a good story. So, and Chris can attest to this. So, back when we were in Tragedy together, we would do these gigs with the band called Vor in Fayetteville.
Okay.
And these guys were like blood brothers to us. You know, we go down there, we spend the night at John's house, and I have sleep apnea. So I snore, right?
Right.
So after making fun of me all night one night, Paige Townsley, the singer of Vor, he started a message board, the NWA message board, Northwest Arkansas metal scene, and he, at that time, they had just come out with an album called Lord of Storms.
Okay.
And so he named his handle Stormlord. And then he's like, hey, I'm going to make you a moderator, so I'm going to call you Snorelord. And it just stuck.
And it stuck.
So when I transferred into the YouTube world and the trucking world, that became my CB handle. That became everything.
Okay, well, let's break this down a little bit, shall we, Steve? Is Snorelord really the wisest thing to choose for a CB radio handle? Like, does your company trust you with a name like that?
Well, I'm the company, but
there you go. Okay.
Well, now I've got a CPAP machine, and I got to show compliance and all that jazz. But
is this just to keep up the Snorelord gimmick, or do you actually need?
No, I actually need it. Now, I did get surgery a while back, but then I gained a bunch of weight, and I've lost quite a bit of weight, and I'm still losing. But hopefully, I won't need it.
Yeah.
Eventually, if I can get down to another 50 pounds, I think.
Nice.
So.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but haven't you lost weight?
Yeah. I was almost 400 pounds at one point.
Yeah.
Now I'm
good
down
on
to
you, man.
290. So yeah.
How did you accomplish that?
Keto, low carb.
Oh yeah.
No sugar.
No taste, no flavors. What I hear.
No
but
sugar.
I do
no
hear
fire.
that when you wean off of sugar, like your body adjusts to that, and when you use something, like if you have a drink of a soda or something, like I quit drinking soda for a long time, and when I had a first sip back, I was like, God, it is like packed full of sugar.
Yep.
So when you think about it, it's like, oh, it's a huge sacrifice. But really, when you kind of wean off of that, your body doesn't.
Oh yeah.
Need that.
Yep. It's tough. The bread is the tough thing too.
Yeah.
Because getting off that and just stop eating. Like if it didn't have a mom or come out of the ground, you don't eat it. That's pretty much it.
There you go. That's an easy way to look at that. So you're a truck driver by day, yeah?
Yep.
Do you still drive actively, or what's kind of more your day to day now?
It's more part time. So right now I'm running dispatch and safety. So
nice.
Kind of a jack of all trades with that. So I've always got my phone glued to my head, and it's pretty cool because I work from home. I haven't run a load since April. So
really,
yeah.
Do you miss being out on the road?
Not really. I mean, parts of it I do, but parts of it I don't.
Yep.
So I've developed a routine at home, and been able to get back to music. So
yeah. What was your routes like? Like, did you do one days where you're go to Kansas City and back, or did you do longer stints, or how was that for you?
A few years ago, we go to Ohio and back, or at the beginning of my career, I was all over the place. But the last couple of years, I've been basically Kansas City to Springfield, Arkansas to St. Louis. Just 4-state area.
Yeah, cool.
So
that seems a lot easier to manage.
Yeah, I mean. With fuel being as expensive as it is.
Dude, it's nuts. Yeah. It's, I mean, thankfully coming down for cars, but not for diesel.
Right.
So.
So yeah, that snorelord became, so I used it for my YouTube. And
Yeah. What
And-
kind of stuff do you do on your YouTube?
well, my original channel, it's called Snorelord OG. That's music, health, everything. That's the original channel I started. But then I started a new one to vlog about the trucking stuff, and that one's called Snorelord, the Metalhead Viking Caveman Trucker.
Write that down, folks.
So yeah, but it's fun. I mean, I do live feeds every morning, talk about boring trucking stuff, and
Really, that's cool.
yeah. And then Friday, or no, usually Saturday nights I'll do open forum.
Yeah.
I'll go live on both channels with StreamYard, and we'll talk music. You know, there's a lot of metalheads driving trucks. So
Yeah, for sure.
So
That's cool. And that's cool that you're able to kind of meld the two things that you're passionate about and find an audience that's the same.
and that's kind of how I got into the, you know, back when YouTube first started their partnership program, I would approach these big YouTube truckers and say, hey, I've got music that is not copyrighted, you know, won't give you a copyright strike. And they're like, yeah, sure. And so that's kind of how I got into these
Smart,
circles.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Very cool. Man. I'm super excited to talk to you about some of the history of the Springfield scene, specifically the metal Springfield scene.
yeah.
Like I told Chris, I moved here to Springfield from Ava in 2003. Finally, in 2007 is when I got into the music scene myself, but only as a bystander for the most part, and then eventually into it. So I missed out on the days of the juke joint and of the Regency downtown was one of the hot spots to be and all this, as well as some of the big bands, Public Assassin, right before I started, and I was like, dang it. So hopefully you can kind of fill in some spaces for us here.
Yeah, so this might be long and drawn out. So back in 1991, well, let me back up even further. So back in 90, I remember I was still in high school. I graduated in 1990, and we were hanging out at the mall, at the arcade. Remember those? That's how old I am.
By the way, hang on. Those are like a desolate graveyard now, the mall.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's sad.
And so we heard about this party where this thrash metal was playing. You know, and this is at a time where the only bands that would play Springfield were the local cover bands. And even then they're like doing the classic rock stuff,
right.
You know, that's been overplayed. Yep. You know, you had Naked Zoo back in those days. They were doing a lot more of the glam stuff. They were transitioning to like the Metallica stuff, you know. But we heard about this party, so we tried to find it, never found it, but we heard this epic thing about it. So the next day, I was at a tape store, a record store called the Mad Platter, and I ran into Joe Morton.
Okay, yeah.
Who is literally the godfather of the thrash death scene here.
Right.
And
Joe from
Public Assassin.
Public Assassin, yeah.
At that time, Public Assassin had a different lineup, and very big, burly, biker, scary looking dudes.
Yeah,
you know? And
yeah.
apparently that's where Greg Ponder saw them, was at that party. He started telling us about, oh yeah, we just played a party, cops broke it up, you know. So we were trying to find that party.
Wow.
So Joe will talk your ear off. So he told me, yeah, man, you ought to start a band. And apparently that was the show that Greg Ponder met Joe Morton. Then there were some lineup changes. They brought in Matt Browning to Public Assassin. So and then Steve Childers. So you had Ponder, Childers, Matt Browning, and Joe Morton.
Right.
The original lineup, or the second original lineup. And then so they were starting on the north side, and on the south side you had, which was the more ritzier side of Springfield, you had Hate Maker, which consisted of people I went to high school with, Casey Sadler, Terry Mackey, Drew Yant was the drummer, and then Brian Myers was the second guitar player, and they were playing stuff like Creator, Slayer, and so they were doing the south side. And so
where were the places to play on the south side?
Well, nothing,
just house parties.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Right.
So eventually, Public Assassin would try out a few people to finish the lineup before they finaled on Steve and Matt.
Mm-hmm.
And so eventually they would do their first gig at a place called, what's the name of the arcade place?
1984.
No, it was like basically this hole in the wall building, Funtastic Arcade, I think, something like that. So, somebody's probably going to be yelling at the camera who might know the history. I wish Joel was here.
Yeah.
And they did their first gig there, and so eventually that would move to the Commercial Street Club, which was right off of Robertson and Commercial.
Okay.
The building's still there. You can rent it out. And they would start doing shows there called The Pit. That was the club. It was supposed to be, minors, and because back then minors couldn't get into clubs.
Right.
I mean, you had the Regency doing some shows. Eventually, Public Assassin kept getting kicked out of all these different clubs, so they said, "Screw it, we're just going to start our own club."
But why did they get kicked out? Was it just their music was too heavy? Were
The
they
music-
not drawing?
Music was heavy. They didn't like the moshing, and
right.
And I was always one of the first ones on the stage, banging my head, as a young teenager punk. And
which you got to remember too, when you go that far back, it's not. I mean, that's for somebody that owns a venue like that. They're gonna immediately think liability and all that. It's not like, we know what it is all about now. It's not like people trying to hurt each other and
Right,
stuff. But
yeah.
I remember when that first was a thing with mosh pits and all that. People were like, "Are they trying to hurt each other or what?" There's just like that weird confusion. So I can see why they'd be like, no, not so much.
Yeah, and they, half their set was covers, but it was all Metallica, Slayer, Deicide, Sepultura.
Yeah.
And then the other half were their originals. And, back when bands you were lucky to hear, an AC/DC song, I mean, you had Naked Zoo doing like Motley Crue, Poison, stuff like that.
Right.
But Public Assassin was the first one that came out and says, we're doing this thrash death metal stuff,
Which takes some guts, by the way, if everybody else around you is not doing that.
Right. So I decided I wanted to start a band and join the scene. So I started the third thrash band in Springfield, and it was called Ill Fader.
Okay.
And we basically were the remnants of the other two bands that didn't make the cut. So we were not the best polished.
Sure. But how were you accepted with the other two?
Well, I mean,
were they like, hey, let's do a show together? Were they like,
yeah. I mean,
screw these guys.
Yeah, because back then it was a rarity to find people listening and playing the same music,
Yep.
And so our first gig was at the Pit with Hate Maker and Public Assassin. And then we played a month later, or maybe 2 weeks later, with the same lineup. But our bass player had quit at the time, and it consisted of me, Jerry Troche, Scott Thomas, I think was his name. He passed away a few years ago, and then we had Tim Burton replace him, and then John Parrish, who also just passed away a few years ago. He was on drums, and he was someone that Matt Browning found for us.
Really?
So, and what's funny, and Chris is part of this group too, is that a bunch of us BMX freestylers transitioned into the metal scene.
I was going to say, and I've always noticed that the BMX scene here in town, and some of the skateboarders and stuff too, really kind of got into that early phase of metal here.
Yeah.
Jimmy Pitts is one that
yep.
comes to mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Ponder, Jimmy Pitts, Chris, Matt Browning. We were all part. It's like we already all knew each other, and I literally sold my bike to get an amp to keep up with the drummer.
Really?
I literally went from one hobby to the other. You
Wow.
know? And so we played 3 gigs as Ill Fader, and then towards the end we hired the singer because I was tired of playing and singing at the same time. His name was Yummy, Mike Balistreri, and when the band, he joined Ill Fader, but when they broke up, he stuck with me. He learned to play bass, and that's where we found Brian Stokes, your drummer, and Will Potts on other guitar, and we formed Cyanide Rainbow, and that was in 93, 94.
Yeah. Wow.
And
back when Brian had hair.
Yeah. Brian had hair. We all had hair. And and then that was part of the second tier. Chris and I were talking about this earlier. You had Plotting Misery, Wicked Serenity, Frozen Illusion. What's some of the others? And so Public Assassin now had a choice of bands to have open up for them all the time. And then they would bring in bands from out of town, bands like Brutality, Nosferatu, Diabolic Possession, Dead Orchestra. and just became this big family.
Wow.
And Cyanide Rainbow, I mean, we did pretty good. I think we were, a couple of years, and then the grunge happened, and none of the clubs would let you play. None of the clubs
Because they were
wanted
booking
you.
grunge acts.
They're-
Is that
Well, because metal wasn't popular,
right?
and the thrash, the signed bands like Metallica, everybody was trying to recreate the Black Album, and you had bands selling out left and right, and it was just a bad time for metal. So we were forced to play house parties, and there's a infamous house called Happy Land.
Okay.
And I mean, this place is probably the size of this room here, but some of the best gigs were at that place. I mean, you literally had a microphone here. I had my guitar like this, and your amp was
Like right against your back.
Against your back, and there'd be these, you had the bob and weave, so the microphone went
Wow.
in the face.
Yeah.
I mean, those were good times, though.
And that's funny too, isn't it? Like, if you were to walk into a place like that now and have to play, you'd be like, God, this, really? Like, you know who I am? But the memories that you make and stuff and gigs like that, like, are just priceless. Like, some of my favorite shows are the ones where it's like, exactly what you said, like, I'm dodging headstocks and stuff to make sure I don't get whacked in the face. But it's because it's just like everybody feels so in the moment and so right there with you. And it's because they're right on your ass.
Well, there was a infamous gig at Happy Land that it was when Richard Christie had just moved into Springfield to join Public Assassin. So we were literally, Cyanide Rainbow was literally the first band he saw play here.
Wow.
And we were at Happy Land, and Steve Childers had just bought this red BC Rich Warlock. And like through the first song, I break a string and I don't have an extra. So Steve hands me this guitar. He goes, okay, you can play this. And I'm like, holy crap. So I had two guys in front of me the whole time, protecting me and the guitar. And I'm sitting there like against my amp doing half the vocals, like, it was, I mean, but it was good times, and then eventually, Cyanide Rainbow would end, and Mike and I kind of left, and we hired this female drummer who was married to Jimmy Pitts at the time.
Yeah.
And she was a great death metal drummer. And we
yeah.
did, Cyanide Rainbow did our second demo with her, and he, the bass player, he moved to California. I joined a band with Jimmy Pitts called Communion.
Mm-hmm.
And that lasted, I don't know, a few months. And then I just kind of hopped around, and then eventually I wanted, Public Assassin had broken up. So Greg and I and Darren Willis, we started Tragedy, and Greg was playing drums, which was a new instrument for him, and Darren was learning how to play bass. So I was the only one that kind of knew his instrument.
Right.
So I decided I was going to start doing the death vocal, clean vocal thing.
Gotcha.
And we were more of a doom band, but then Darren left. Greg went back on bass, and then we got Chris Hansen, and now we're a death metal band because Chris doesn't like to play slow. And so I dropped all the clean vocals, and we did that for a minute, and then Rich Brantner replaced me, which at the time was kind of it was lame, but I think it was good at the time because Rich Brantner's a way better guitar player than I am, and he does the Merciful Fate stuff perfectly, which is what Ponder wanted. And
gotcha.
And if there's anybody that
so it's more of a clicking of styles, probably more than anything. Yeah.
And also, if there's anybody that could be a clone of Steve Childers, it would be Rich Brantner.
Gotcha.
So it's basically so that Tragedy did that, and then I joined a death metal band out of Lebanon for a minute called Sickened, and that was fun because I'd never been in a position where I joined an already existing band. I was always part of the beginning.
Yep. All the groundwork and stuff. Yeah.
And so eventually we would move the practice to Springfield, but then the lead singer didn't want to do that. So that's when I turned it into Apnea, and that was back in 2000. And, and then Apnea, we were going strong until 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
So, with some lineup changes, opened up for quite a few cool bands, big bands. We opened up for Lamb of God and 6 Feet Under, and, Incantation and Immolation,
Oh, okay. Were those all shows here in Springfield, or did you ever?
No, some were in Arkansas.
Yeah.
Some were here. So yeah, I mean, Apnea, we recorded quite a few albums, and so yeah, so when Public Assassin did the reunion, obviously, Apnea was one of the natural choices.
Yeah.
We even did an old Ill Fader song.
Nice.
So,
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
and well, one thing I forgot to mention, there was a point where guitarist, lead singer for Apnea, bass player for Forever Shadows, which featured Greg Ponder, Brian Stokes, Howard, can't remember his last name, and I was playing, and that was fun because I was just playing bass, didn't have to worry about vocals, didn't have to worry about writing anything. I was just there, and then eventually, Ponder would I would leave that band, and Brantner replaced me on that band too. But I give him crap, like, "What are you doing? Follow me around,
Right.
replace
Yeah.
me in my
When you
bands?"
see Brantner, you get nervous. Yeah. Yeah.
No, he and I are good friends. So, and then I was playing drums for Backo Butchery, which features my wife.
Yeah.
So, and that was fun. And then eventually, I left Backo Butchery to make it easier for the gigs because it like every show we'd have to get babysitter for the kids, and and it always had to be Apnea and Backo Butchery.
See, that's not what I had heard. I had heard that you Yoko Onered her.
Who knows? Rumors fly in our small metal scene.
Just saying. No.
But no, it was there was one gig that we opened up for Origin. We brought them in, because we were doing some promotions. There was a club called Krager's that it was perfect because we could bring bands in, we could feed them with the restaurant, and then we give them a place to stay, and it was a perfect setup. And so one of the first bands that we brought in was Origin, who's national signed act, and on Nuclear Blast at the time, I think. And they and there was one gig where I played guitar, vocals for Apnea, I played bass for Forever Shadows, and drums for Backo Butchery. So eventually I would leave Backo and just to concentrate on Apnea, and then later on Ann would join Apnea.
Yeah.
So it was the last year that we were playing, last couple of years that we were playing.
What was that like, getting to play with your wife and somebody that you have that close of a connection to?
It's funny because she's going to be watching this too. So when we did Backo Butchery, Willie was on guitar, Willie Wardlaw, and vocals. I was learning to play the drums, so every single song was a drum lesson for me.
Right.
And then Anna was learning to play the bass.
Mm-hmm.
And Willie's a very patient person, and
Yep.
and so in that context, she was fine with it. But at one point, she was like, "I'm never going to join Apnea because you're kind of an ass." and I was like, "No, I'm not." It's like, "Yeah, you are." So, but then one day when we were getting ready to practice, Robbie Valentine, our old bass player, he shows up and this freaked me out because he's like, "We're getting ready to practice, we're getting ready to go to the pad," and Ann comes out and she's got a bass in her hand. And Robbie's like, "Hey guys, I've got some bad news. I'm leaving the band," because he physically couldn't play the songs anymore.
Really?
Because his hands were messed up.
And
He's
such a good dude. I love Robbie.
And then Ann and I have collaborated, and she's now your bass player. I'm like, I was because like, what else? What other secrets are you
Right.
keeping,
So
Robbie?
that, I mean, like, total bombshell. You had no idea.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
And
crazy.
She did really well. I mean, she, and so the last lineup of Apnea was Jake Norman on drums, Walmart Rob or Robert Close on guitar, second guitar, and me, and then Ann on bass. And then throughout the years, Apnea, so we recorded one album with Apnea with the remnants of Sicken, which had Scott Judy and Scott Crunk. And then we would eventually, and that's how I learned how to play drums, was when Scott Crunk left, I was like, screw it, I'm going to become a drummer.
Yeah.
And so what was interesting is we tried out this guy. We had already recorded our first album, and this guy comes over, and I could tell, you've been a musician for a while. You can just tell, right? You can just tell when someone's got it, when someone doesn't.
Yeah. Usually within just a handful of notes.
Yeah, and this guy comes in, he gets behind the drum set, and I'm like, all right, so this is how the song goes. You know, I gave him a CD earlier, and it's just a simple you know, half times, right? He could not figure that out.
Yeah.
So I get behind the drum set and I show him how to play that song. He's like, damn, you don't need a guitar player. You just need a guitar player. You don't need a drummer. I'm like, you know what? You're absolutely right.
Right. Thanks for that. You're good to go.
And so we did write one song with him though, Netherworld Night Sky, which was one of Apnea's more popular songs.
Yeah.
But and so the rule was the guy had to be able to play drums better than me.
Yeah.
And I'm not that great of a drummer. And so we tried out. So Joe Morton, being the connected person he is, he introduced us to a guy named Remy, who he tried out and he was on it. And so we recorded an EP with him. Then we recorded 2 albums with him. And then he would move on to Vor in Fayetteville.
Oh, okay.
And so, and then that's when we found Jake.
Nice.
And it kind of brought us to a different level because Jake was into the blast beats. So we could like kick it up a notch on the death metal stuff. But
yeah.
I'm heavily influenced by Doom, you know, like Sabbath and Candlemass and Crowbar and
heavy
My
stuff.
Dying Bride,
Yeah.
you know, but also Napalm Death, you know, Vader, stuff like that.
Very cool.
So,
Very cool. Well, this is something that we don't do often, but because you and Chris have both been in the scene so long, I think it's super cool. You brought some show and tell stuff, didn't you?
Yeah.
All right, let's see what that's all about.
We got the well-weathered
Oh,
cassette
man.
case. And
Oh, dude.
these are all local level bands. And so
Wow. Here, let's see this.
see if
There
we
you go.
can.
See if we can.
So you've got Cyanide Rainbow. That's our first demo. That was the second death demo that we did with the Jimmy Pitts' ex-wife.
Who recorded some of this early stuff here in Springfield? Like who was everybody's go-to person or anything?
Well, that's a funny story. So the one that was affordable, Ralph Plank Studios, which funny story about this album or this demo is that he had never recorded metal before. So we answered one of his ads. Can't get in there. And so the way we did it is we rehearsed everything because we didn't want to waste any studio time.
Right.
And so we gave him like a couple of Metallica albums, a couple of Overkill albums, kind of give him ideas. Oh yeah, I can do that. And I remember, you know, he put us all in these individual rooms. My amp was actually recorded in a bathroom, had the perfect reverb, you know?
Yep.
And Brian, I wish Brian was here. He could help tell the story, but we played our first song. And I remember when he opened the door, he had this look of like, what the hell did I just get into? And he goes like, man, you guys were on it. I mean, most bands are arguing about what chords are going where, but you guys just, I mean, yeah, dude, studio time's expensive.
Right. Yeah. We're not here to learn and write songs. We're here to record what we already know.
Yeah, we're not Metallica, and it's going to take
Right.
2 years to write this thing. I mean, this is written.
We're the
ready
ones
to
paying
go.
for it. Yeah.
Right. So, but yeah, then you have the original Public Assassin demo. Is that showing up there? And then you have the second Public Assassin demo, and the third one, and then the fourth one. Then you have Eternal, and then you have Crucible, which they were out of St. Louis.
Okay.
And they also recorded with Rick Granberg, which is where Public Assassin was recording with. And then you have Diabolic Possession, Nosferatu, Xenomorph. They were out of what was it, Iowa? Yeah, Des Moines, Iowa, I believe. And then Plotty Misery, Mooncalf, they were out of Kansas City. Pitchfork, that was a Joe Morton project. And then Malicious Intent, I think they were out of Joplin or Carthage.
That's cool that you've got some from surrounding areas and stuff too, not just Springfield exclusive.
And then Dead Orchestra, they were out of Omaha. Yeah, Omaha, that's where all those bands. Omaha had something in the water.
Is this Pisser? Is that what that says?
Yeah, and that was a side project that that Steve Childers and Richard Christie did. It was a joke band.
Yeah.
And
Like with comedy lyrics and stuff?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Nice.
over the top ridiculousness, which kind of what broke Public Assassin up originally.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then Guardy Lou, they weren't local, but then, I accidentally got Candlemass in there. Yeah. And then you got Naked Zoo. Now, that Kill Switch band, that was a band that we played with Communion at the rock climbing place there off of Chestnut, or Glenstone, I mean. But yeah, that's Naked Zoo's. That was their.
Is this the one that was on MTV or whatever? There, I can.
Yeah, I think so. That was their. They had started to transition to a thrash band, but that's all originals there.
Huh.
And so yeah, it was. I don't miss those days, and so. Got some old relics. So
okay.
Had a bunch of this. So this is Queen City Rock. This was original magazine, and this is the issue that had Public Assassin in it.
Really?
Yeah.
So like an actual local, there's US 97.
Yeah.
So here's the locally done Queen City Rock.
Yep. And then there's a Public Assassin playing on Public Access. There's a video of that.
Really?
Yep. And then let's see. Let's show you some flyers here. That is the flyer to my very first show right there.
Really?
As a musician. Ill Fader was the name of the band. Our guitar player came up with that name. And then this was one of those old
SMSU, that's how you know it's not from yesterday.
This is one of those old, like, they would have all these bands and they would invite Public Assassin and they realized it was a mistake. Like, what the hell have we done?
Right.
That was a good show. And then Laboom. Do you know of Laboom?
Not at all.
Laboom is what the Rockwell used to be called.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep. And
interesting.
Yep. And so and they're the ones that once grunge hit, they're like, yeah, screw you metal bands. And so for a long time, and Chris can attest to this, the only place that was let us play was Coley's.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And so it was funny because Coley's, the stage is actually the size of a drum riser. And so most bands, they'd put the drums on the stage, and then you would play in front of it. There was no monitors. You're lucky you could hear vocals, and the drummer couldn't hear anything.
Yeah.
And we cut our teeth. I mean, me and Chris and all these bands, we cut our teeth at that club. There was no cover, and Coley's was perfect because they had two sections. If you didn't want metal music, you can go to the other side and drink. And their jukebox was so loud you wouldn't even hear the bands.
Wow. And
then on the band side, there might have been a few people that shouldn't have been there, in the back drinking, and so we learned to do our songs without vocals because you didn't hear the vocals, and
being a singer, I couldn't imagine. I mean, I've had shows where I'm struggling to hear, but I've never been able to not at all.
Well, the trick that I learned as a vocalist is that I would have to wear an earplug,
just to get a different bounce of sound.
Well, so you're not overextending your voice,
right?
Because you don't hear yourself when you do, you shout.
Yep.
So if you could hear yourself and just trust that the PA is doing it,
true.
And that's what I would do. And a friend of mine taught me a trick where he goes, "You know how to tune a guitar, right?" He goes, "Well, this is how you check to make sure you're in key." And so you plug one ear. And so there were times when you see me during a gig, I'd plug one ear and make sure I was in key if I was doing the singing stuff. But yeah, Apnea was Tragedy was probably the first band that in this area that would mix the vocals. And so when Apnea formed, that's exactly what I went to.
Yeah.
And so it was the perfect mix of doom and death. But yeah, so basically I started the third thrash band in Springfield of the scraps that no one else wanted, and turned it into something.
And made it something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's awesome.
And when we tried out Brian, Brian was awesome.
Yeah.
And he was a lot of times, a lot of people are like, well, Matt Browning's the best drummer in Springfield. No one can match him. And that was primarily true. A lot of these bands didn't have drummers that could keep up with Slayer and
Yeah.
You know, and old Metallica and stuff like that. And then Brian Stokes come in and goes, nope, I could do this too.
Yeah.
And we surprised the scene. Cyanide Rainbow came like, holy crap.
That's awesome.
You
That's
know,
got to be a
so-
good feeling as a band too. Like, hey, look what we got.
Yeah, and we also did the dual vocalist. The bass player, he did like the raspy black metal style vocals, and I did the deep guttural stuff and didn't do the singing back then. We did bring a singer in for a minute that was like the power metal style, and yeah, that was one of the reasons why I kind of like, I'm gonna take Cyanide Rainbow over here now. So, but
Very cool, man. Well, that's I love that, and just the same as Chris, I love that you've kept on to a lot of that nostalgia.
well,
Because-
this is just part of it. I mean, I've got all the flyers that Apnea has played.
Right.
Because, you know, we've opened up for, I think the best gig was our 6 Feet Under gig. We sounded horrible, but man, no one knew the difference.
Right. Yeah.
And Lamb of God, although Lamb of God didn't really, like, Lamb of God was awesome. And then we also opened up for Soulfly.
Okay. Yep.
So those were the biggest shows in MOD. And so I got to see a lot of the people that, like, we got to open up for Metal Church.
Okay. Yeah.
That was awesome when they kicked in the Badlands. Like, I was like all schoolgirl, you know. It
Yep.
was awesome.
Yep.
So
That's very cool. Well, let's wrap this section up, and we're gonna get some games and some other stuff. I'm gonna give you some options also.
all right.
All right. So I'm gonna change it up a little bit here. Let's see. We could do an awkward pause. I feel like I should always offer that. We can go 2 out of 3 Rochambeau. If you're familiar with what that is. Or you can demonstrate what it's like to be the snorelord.
I think we'll go with the awkward pause.
Steve Allington, everybody. We'll be right back.